The sword stops 1 inch from his throat. Musashi doesn't flinch, doesn't blink, doesn't breathe. The man holding the blade is shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that he's already lost. Musashi hasn't moved, hasn't drawn his weapon, hasn't even shifted his weight. But the fight ended 3 seconds ago, before it started, in the space between the thought and the action. And that space, that microscopic gap where your mind hesitates, second guesses, negotiates with reality, is where you lose everything, not just fights. Your focus, your time, your potential. The mental strength you think you're building every time you stay motivated is actually making you weaker. Because Musashi didn't train his mind to be strong, he trained it to be silent. Here's what no one tells you about mental strength. It's not built through positive thinking, morning routines, or inspirational quotes on your wall. It's built through a practice so uncomfortable, so unglamorous, so brutally simple that your brain will invent 1,000 reasons to avoid it. Musashi called it Heijōshin, Ping-chang Shin, the mind of no mind. Not confidence, not courage, not calm, emptiness. The ability to stand in the center of chaos, swords drawn, death imminent, ego screaming, and feel nothing. No fear, no excitement, no story about what's happening, just pure perception and instant response. And the reason most people never develop this isn't because they're weak. It's because they're addicted to the feeling of thinking. The student who couldn't stop thinking. Let me show you what I mean. 1638. A young samurai named Takuan arrives at the monastery where Musashi is staying. Takuan is brilliant, educated, trained in 3 sword schools. He's read every text on strategy, memorized every kata, studied under masters across Japan. And he's terrified, because in 2 weeks, he's supposed to fight a duel against a man who's killed 17 opponents without breaking a sweat. Takuan asks Musashi for advice. Musashi says nothing, just gestures for Takuan to follow him outside. They walk to a clearing. Musashi picks up 2 wooden swords and tosses one to Takuan. "Attack me!" Takuan hesitates. "But I haven't warmed up." "Attack me." Takuan assumes his stance. Perfect form, textbook posture. He takes a breath, thinking about the opening move, calculating the angle, remembering what his teacher said about. Musashi strikes him across the ribs before Takuan's sword moves an inch. Takuan stumbles back, confused, humiliated. "Again," Musashi says. Takuan resets. This time he tries not to think, which, of course, is still thinking. He lunges forward. Musashi sidesteps and taps the back of Takuan's head as he passes. Again. They do this 17 times. Every time Takuan hesitates for a fraction of a second, not physically but mentally. His mind is running a program. Assess, decide, act. And in that gap between decide and act, Musashi is already 3 moves ahead. Finally, Takuan throws down his sword. "I don't understand. I know the techniques. I know the counters. Why can't I touch you?" Musashi lowers his sword. "Because you're thinking about fighting instead of fighting." "But how do I fight without thinking?" "You don't learn how. You unlearn how to think." Takuan stares at him, lost. And Musashi says something that would change everything. "Your mind is your enemy, and you've spent your entire life feeding it." Here's what Musashi understood that most people never will. The voice in your head, the one that narrates your life, evaluates your choices, predicts outcomes, replays mistakes, is not you. It's a tool. And like any tool, it's useful in specific contexts and destructive when you can't put it down. You don't need to think about breathing. You don't need to think about walking. You don't need to think about catching something thrown at your face. Your body knows. But somewhere along the way, you learn to override that instinct with analysis, to doubt the body's intelligence, to wait for the mind's permission before acting. And now you're slow. Not physically, mentally. You hesitate, second guess, get trapped in loops of what if, and every time you do that, you're training yourself to be weaker. Takuan spends the next 3 days with Musashi. No sparring, no techniques, no advice, just silence. Musashi has him sit in the clearing from dawn to dusk. No meditation instructions, no mantra, just Sit. Notice when you're thinking. Let it pass. The first day, Takwon can't last 10 minutes. His mind is loud, relentless. What if I lose the duel? What will people think? Am I wasting time sitting here? This isn't real training. Every thought feels urgent, true, important. But Musashi told him, don't fight the thoughts. Just see them for what they are, noise. Day 2 is worse, because now Takwon is thinking about not thinking, judging himself for every thought that arises, getting frustrated, angry, restless. Musashi walks by once, sees the tension in Takwon's shoulders and says, "You're still trying to control it. Stop trying, just watch." And then he leaves. Day 3. Something shifts. Takwon is sitting in the clearing and a thought appears. I'm going to die in this duel. But this time, he doesn't engage with it. He just sees it, lets it pass, like a cloud. Another thought. This is pointless. It passes. Another, I should be training. It passes. And slowly, the space between thoughts gets longer. The silence gets louder, and in that silence, Takwon feels something he's never felt before. Clarity. Not confidence, not peace. Just presence. His body. His breath. The ground beneath him. No story, no commentary, no fear, just now. That evening, Musashi comes back. Pick up your sword. Takwon stands. His legs are stiff from sitting all day. His mind is quiet. Musashi attacks without warning, and this time, Takwon's body moves, not because he decided to, not because he remembered a technique. It just responds. He deflects Musashi's strike, counters, flows into the next movement like water. No hesitation, no gap, just action. Musashi stops, steps back, bows. Now you're ready. Takwon is stunned. What just happened? You stopped thinking, and your body remembered what it already knew. But here's the part most people miss when they hear stories like this. The 5 brutal rules. Takwon wins his duel, not through technique, not through strategy, through emptiness. His opponent attacks with rage, with desperation, with every ounce of skill he's accumulated over 20 years. And Takwon just isn't there. He moves without thought, strikes without intention, ends the fight in 11 seconds. Afterwards, people ask him how he did it. He can't explain, because there was no him in the moment, just the movement itself. Musashi watched this happen dozens of times. Students who'd trained for years, paralyzed by their own minds. And students who'd barely trained at all, moving with terrifying efficiency once their thoughts went silent. So he distilled everything he'd learned into 5 rules. Not guidelines, not suggestions. Rules. The kind that sound simple until you actually try to follow them, and then you realize they're designed to dismantle the person you think you are. He never wrote them down as a list. They're scattered across the Book of 5 Rings, buried in metaphor and restraint. But if you read carefully, if you look past the swordsmanship into the psychology, you'll find them. Rule 1. Accept death before the fight. Musashi writes, if you think you are going to die, you will die. If you think you are going to live, you will die. Expect nothing, fear nothing. Sounds poetic, but here's what it actually means. Every time you enter a situation attached to the outcome, you've already lost. Because attachment creates hesitation. You start protecting, calculating, playing not to lose instead of playing to win. Takwon almost lost his duel before it started because he was clinging to survival. His mind was running a constant program. Don't die, don't embarrass yourself, don't make a mistake. And that program slowed him down by fractions of a second, fractions that get you killed. But the moment he accepted that he might die, truly accepted it, not as a belief, but as a felt reality, his body became free. No hesitation, no self-preservation, just movement. Now bring this into your life. Every time you need something to work out, the job, the relationship, the project, you choke. Not because you're not capable, but because you're too attached to the result. Your mind starts projecting. What if it fails? What will people think? What does this mean about me? And that projection pulls you out of the present, where the actual work happens. Musashi's rule is brutal because it asks you to do the impossible. Care deeply and be completely unattached at the same time. Give everything. Expect nothing. Act with total commitment and zero guarantee. Most people can't do this, so they either don't commit and wonder why nothing works, or they overcommit emotionally and collapse when it doesn't go their way. But there's a third path, the one Musashi walked, where you show up fully, execute flawlessly, and remain internally untouched by the outcome. Not because you don't care, but because you've already made peace with the worst-case scenario. Rule 2. Know your enemy. Become your enemy. Musashi spent years studying his opponents before fighting them. Not their techniques, their psychology, how they thought, what they feared, what they protected. He'd watch them train, eat, sleep, walk through town. And by the time they faced each other, Musashi didn't just know how they'd attack, he knew why. He writes, "You must understand the enemy's mind and become the enemy." But here's the twist most people miss. Your greatest enemy isn't external. It's the version of yourself that sabotages you from the inside. The voice that says, "You're not ready yet." The impulse that says, "Just one more video, then I'll start." The comfort-seeking pattern that makes you choose the easy path every single time. That's your opponent. And Musashi's rule says, study it, understand it, predict it. Most people think self-awareness is enough. I know I procrastinate, I know I get distracted, I know I quit when things get hard. But knowing doesn't change anything. Musashi didn't just know his opponent's patterns. He anticipated them so completely that he could counter before they even attacked. You need to do the same with yourself. When does your discipline collapse? What time of day? What triggers it? When do you make excuses? What words do you use? What story do you tell yourself? When do you quit? How many days in? What's the pattern? Map your failures with the same precision Musashi mapped his opponents. Because once you see the pattern clearly enough, you can interrupt it before it runs. You can recognize the moment where you're about to negotiate, about to delay, about to choose comfort. And you can strike first, not against yourself, against the pattern. Rule 3. No wasted movement. Musashi's fighting style had one defining characteristic: economy. No flourishes, no excess, no wasted energy. Every movement served a purpose: defend, advance, or kill. He writes, "Do nothing which is of no use." 5 words that will dismantle your entire life if you apply them honestly. Because here's what happens when you audit your day through that lens. 3 hours on your phone, no use. Checking emails 17 times, no use. Watching breakdowns of other people's success, no use. Researching the perfect system instead of starting with an imperfect one, no use. You think you're being productive because you're busy. But Musashi would see you and ask one question: did it move you closer to the target, or did it just move? Here's the brutal part. Most of what you do every day is comfort-seeking disguised as progress. You're not lazy. You're strategically avoiding the 1 or 2 actions that would actually change everything. Because those actions are uncomfortable. They require focus. Silence. The willingness to suck at something new. So instead, you do 17 useful-sounding things that require 0 courage. Organize your workspace. Update your system. Read another book. Watch another video. All motion, 0 movement. Musashi didn't train by reading scrolls about sword technique. He picked up a sword and swung it until his hands bled. That's movement. Everything else is hesitation dressed as preparation. Rule 4. Never depend on a single technique. Musashi was famous for fighting with 2 swords, not because it was flashy, not because it was traditional, but because it made him unpredictable. Most samurai mastered one weapon, one style, one approach, and Musashi exploited that predictability ruthlessly. He writes, "You should not have a favorite weapon. To become overfamiliar with one weapon is as much a fault as not knowing it sufficiently well." Translation: The moment you rely on one thing, you become fragile. Bring this to your life. You have a method that works, a routine, a system. And the moment it stops working, because life changes, because circumstances shift, you collapse. Because you didn't build a foundation, you built a dependency. Musashi's rule says, train in multiple modes so you're never reliant on perfect conditions. Can you focus without music? Can you work without caffeine? Can you execute without motivation? Can you endure without distraction? If the answer is no, then you're not strong. You're conditionally functional. And the first time conditions change, you'll realize you never built mental strength. You built a crutch. Rule 5. The mind must be still. This is the rule that ties everything together. Musashi writes, in strategy, it is important to see distant things as if they were close and to take a distanced view of close things. He's talking about perspective, the ability to see clearly when everyone else is reacting, to remain internally unmoved while everything around you is chaos. He's talking about Heijōshin, Budongshin, the immovable mind. Not rigid, not cold, unshakable. You can be in the middle of a storm and still see the path. You can be insulted, criticized, attacked, and not react. Because your sense of self isn't tied to external conditions. It's rooted in something deeper, something no one can touch. But here's the trap most people fall into when they try to develop this. They think stillness means suppression. They think being unshakable means not feeling. So they numb themselves, build walls, disconnect, and they call it strength. But Musashi would tell you that's weakness. Because true stillness isn't the absence of feeling. It's the presence of clarity in the middle of feeling. You feel the fear. You acknowledge it. You let it pass through you. And then you act anyway. Not because you've conquered fear, but because you've stopped letting it decide for you. Takuan understood this after his duel. Someone asked him, "Were you afraid?" He said, "Yes, but the fear didn't matter." That's the difference. Most people wait for the fear to go away before they act. Musashi's students acted with the fear still present, and over time, the fear became irrelevant. Not gone, just irrelevant. But knowing these rules and living them are two completely different things, and that's where most people get stuck. The collapse. Takuan returns home after his victory. People celebrate him, call him a master, ask him to teach. And for the first 6 months, he does everything right. Wakes before dawn, practices in silence, keeps his mind still. But slowly, so slowly he doesn't notice, something changes. He starts thinking about the stillness instead of being still. He starts monitoring his progress instead of just doing the work. He starts identifying as someone who has mental strength, which is the exact moment he loses it. One morning, a younger student challenges him to a sparring match. The student is raw, untrained, aggressive. Takuan accepts, confident. They bow. The match begins, and Takuan hesitates. Just for a fraction of a second, but it's enough. The student strikes him across the chest. Hard. Takuan stumbles back, shocked. His mind floods with thoughts. How did that happen? I trained with Musashi. I won my duel. This kid shouldn't be able to touch me. The student strikes again, and again. Takuan tries to respond, but his body feels slow, heavy. His mind is running at full speed, analyzing every movement, judging every mistake. And his body can't keep up. He loses, not close, badly. Afterwards, Takuan sits alone in the dojo, humiliated. He'd spent months mastering the stillness, and in one fight, it vanished, like it was never there. He travels back to Musashi, desperate for answers. I did everything you taught me. Why did I fail? Musashi watches him for a long moment, then asks, when you sat in silence, why were you sitting? To train my mind. Wrong. You were sitting to get something, to achieve stillness. Takuan starts to protest, but Musashi cuts him off. The moment you practice stillness in order to become still, you've already failed. Because now you're chasing stillness, And you can't chase something that only exists when you stop chasing. This is the trap. The one that catches everyone who tries to build mental strength. You start practicing the techniques, following the rules, doing the work, and it works for a while. You feel stronger, clearer, more disciplined. But then, without realizing it, you start performing the discipline instead of living it. You're no longer acting from stillness, you're acting to maintain the identity of someone who is still. And the moment that happens, you're back in the cycle. Thinking about strength instead of being strong. Monitoring your progress instead of just progressing. Protecting the image instead of embodying the reality. Musashi saw this pattern everywhere. Students who mastered the form but lost the essence. Warriors who could execute the technique but froze in actual combat. Monks who could sit in meditation for hours but collapsed the moment real life demanded stillness. He called them Meishin no Toriko, prisoners of delusion. Not because they were weak, but because they'd mistaken the map for the territory. They learned the techniques of mental strength, but they never internalized the truth beneath the techniques. Strength isn't something you build. It's something you uncover by removing everything that makes you weak. Takuan spends another 3 months with Musashi. But this time, the training is different. Musashi doesn't teach him anything new. He just watches. And every time Takuan does something, sits, trains, eats, walks, Musashi asks the same question. Why are you doing that? At first, Takuan has answers. To clear my mind. To build discipline. To improve my technique. But Musashi keeps asking. And eventually, Takuan runs out of answers. Because he realizes the why behind everything he's doing is the same. To feel like he's enough. To prove to himself and everyone else that he's worthy, capable, strong. And that need for validation is what's been sabotaging him the entire time. One night, Musashi takes Takuan to the edge of a cliff. They sit in silence, watching the moon rise over the mountains. After an hour, Musashi speaks. Do you know why I fight? Takuan thinks. To win? No. To survive? No. Then why? Musashi is quiet for a long time. I don't. Takuan is confused. You don't fight. I don't. Why? I just move when movement is required. I strike when striking is required. There's no reason, no purpose, no story. But how do you train if there's no purpose? I don't train for anything. I train because in this moment, training is what's happening. And tomorrow, if training isn't happening, that will be fine too. Takuan's mind resists this completely. But then what's the point of discipline, of mastery, of any of this? Musashi turns to him. The point is that there is no point. And the moment you accept that, you're free. Takuan doesn't understand. Not intellectually. But something in him shifts. A weight he didn't know he was carrying starts to dissolve. He stops trying to become someone, stops trying to prove something, stops monitoring whether he's still, whether he's strong, whether he's doing it right. And in that space, the stillness returns. Not because he achieved it, but because he stopped chasing it. Here's what most people never realize about mental strength. You can't build it through effort, because effort implies resistance, and resistance implies you're fighting against yourself. The voice in your head that says, I need to be stronger, is the same voice that's making you weak, because it's created a gap between who you are and who you think you should be. And you spend all your energy trying to close that gap, when the gap itself is the problem. Musashi didn't try to be strong. He just removed everything that made him weak. The fear, the ego, the need for validation, the attachment to outcomes. And what was left wasn't strength. It was just him, unfiltered, undefended, unmoved by anything external. But here's the part that makes this almost impossible to practice in the modern world. The modern battlefield. Takuan never fought another duel, not because he was afraid, but because after months with Musashi, he realized something that changed everything. The real enemy was never the man across from him. It was the voice in his head that needed the fight to mean something, the ego that needed to win to feel worthy. The mind that couldn't just be without a story to justify its existence. And once he stopped feeding that voice, the need to prove himself disappeared entirely. He spent the rest of his life teaching, farming, living quietly in the mountains. People called him a coward for walking away from combat. He never responded, because he'd won a harder fight, the one most people don't even know they're losing. Now let me bring this into your world, because the battlefield has changed, but the war is exactly the same. You're not fighting duels with swords. You're fighting a 24-hour assault on your attention, your discipline, your ability to sit with yourself without numbing. And you're losing. Not because you're weak, but because the weapons being used against you are designed by people who understand your psychology better than you do. Every app on your phone is engineered to exploit the same vulnerability Musashi spent his life eliminating. Your inability to tolerate boredom. The gap between stimulus and response. The moment where nothing is happening and your mind panics and reaches for distraction. Musashi. Trained to live in that gap. To sit in the silence between thoughts and feel no need to fill it. You've been trained to avoid that gap at all costs, to never be alone with your thoughts for more than 11 seconds before your hand reaches for the phone. And every time you do that, every time you medicate the boredom, the discomfort, the silence, you're training yourself to be weaker. Not tomorrow, right now. Here's the test Musashi would give you. Sit in a room. No phone, no music, no book, no task, just you and the silence. For 10 minutes. Can you do it? Most people can't make it past 3. Not because they're physically incapable, but because the discomfort becomes unbearable. The mind starts screaming for stimulation. This is pointless. You're wasting time. You should be doing something productive, and you believe it. So you reach for the distraction and tell yourself you'll try again later. But later never comes, because you've just reinforced the exact pattern that keeps you trapped. Musashi's rules aren't ancient philosophy. They're a manual for surviving the modern world without losing yourself in it. Rule 1. Accept death before the fight. Translation. Stop being so attached to outcomes that you can't take action. The post you're afraid to publish, the conversation you're avoiding, the project you haven't started because it might fail. You're already dead if you don't try. So act like it. Rule 2. Know your enemy. Translation. Study your self-sabotage patterns with ruthless precision. What time of day do you collapse? What triggers the spiral? What story do you tell yourself when you quit? Map it. Write it down. See it coming before it arrives. Rule 3. No wasted movement. Translation. Audit your day and delete everything that doesn't serve the mission. Not might be useful someday. Not feels productive. Actually moves the needle. Everything else is theater. Rule 4. Never depend on a single technique. Translation. Build strength across multiple dimensions so you're not fragile. Can you work when you're tired, when you're unmotivated, when conditions are terrible? Or do you only function when everything is perfect? Rule 5. The mind must be still. Translation. Stop letting your thoughts control your actions. Feel the fear. Acknowledge it. Act anyway. Feel the resistance. Notice it. Move through it. Feel the discomfort. Sit with it. Don't medicate. But here's the thing about these rules. You can't practice them once and call it done. You can't read this, feel inspired, and expect it to change your life. Because insight without action is just entertainment, and Musashi didn't build mental strength through understanding. He built it through relentless, unglamorous repetition in situations where no one was watching and nothing felt like progress. So here's the path. Not a motivational speech, not a productivity hack. The actual path, it starts tonight. Before bed, you sit in silence for 5 minutes. No phone, no music, no guided meditation, just you and the discomfort of being alone with yourself. You don't try to clear your mind. You don't try to be still. You just sit and watch the thoughts come and let them pass. And when your brain screams at you to stop, to check your phone, to do anything else, you stay. Not because you're trying to achieve enlightenment, but because you're training the one skill that determines everything else. The ability to tolerate discomfort without reacting. Tomorrow morning, you do it again. And the morning after that. And 6 weeks from now, when your discipline is tested, when life demands something from you and there's no motivation, no perfect conditions, no clear path, you won't hesitate. Not because you've become some warrior monk, but because you've spent 6 weeks practicing the gap between stimulus and response. And now your body knows. Discomfort is not danger. Silence is not emptiness. Stillness is not weakness. And you don't need to feel ready to act, you just act. Musashi didn't write his rules for samurai. He wrote them for anyone willing to face the hardest opponent they'll ever meet. The version of themselves that wants comfort more than growth. The voice that negotiates, delays, justifies, quits. And if you actually follow these rules, not today, not when it's convenient, but every single day regardless of how you feel, you won't become unbeatable, but you'll become unmoved. By fear, by doubt, by the chaos around you. And in a world designed to keep you distracted, anxious, and reactive, that makes you dangerous. Musashi's final letter was written to one of his students. 3 lines. I have no regrets. I have followed the path. Now you must walk yours. He didn't tell the student what to do, didn't give instructions or techniques, just reminded him that the path only exists when you walk it. Not when you study it. Not when you prepare for it. Not when you wait for the right moment. When you walk it, you're not Musashi. You're not going to fight 60 duels or live in a cave. But you can do the one thing he did that actually mattered. Stop negotiating with the person you say you want to become. Stop waiting for conditions to be perfect. Stop feeding the voice that tells you you're not ready. And start walking. One step. One uncomfortable moment. One deliberately boring action that produces 0 dopamine and requires 0 validation, today and tomorrow, and every day after that until the path becomes you. Musashi believed the path reveals itself only to those who remain. If this meant something to you, leave a word. Subscribe if you intend to keep walking.